Raise your left hand right now and look at it. For 17 centuries, the Church ran a coordinated campaign to make you believe that hand is inferior, suspicious, and in its most extreme moments, evil itself. They did not do this by accident, and they did not do it without reason. Inside the Pistis Sophia, one of the most aggressively suppressed Gnostic texts in all of human history, Jesus reveals to his inner circle that the left hand carries a precise frequency, one that connects the individual directly to the monad, bypassing every temple, every sacrament, every gatekeeper the Church ever built. The early Church Fathers understood exactly what that knowledge meant for their power. If ordinary people discovered what the left hand could actually do, no one would ever need a priest again. Tonight, you are going to learn exactly what Jesus taught and why they worked so hard to make sure you never did. The suppression of the left hand is one of the longest and most deliberate campaigns of social engineering in recorded history, and it began the moment the early Church understood what was at stake. The Latin word sinister originally meant nothing more than left. It was a neutral, a simple marker of direction. But over the course of several centuries, the Church and its affiliated institutions systematically loaded that word with layers of threat, ominous, dangerous, morally compromised, until the very direction itself became a source of shame. This was not linguistic drift. This was not organic cultural change. This was targeted manipulation of language, designed to make a specific physical capacity feel like a spiritual failure. The historical record of what happened to left-handed children across Europe and the Christian world is not ambiguous. Educators beat students who wrote with their left hand. Parents tied the left arm behind a child's back for hours at a time, forcing the right hand to become dominant through pain and repetition. This was not a fringe practice in isolated communities. It was widespread, multi-generational, and largely unquestioned because it had been framed as moral correction rather than physical punishment. You were not breaking a child's natural preference. You were saving their soul from something unnamed but understood to be real. What the Church never made explicit, what it could not afford to make explicit, is why this suppression was so urgent and so physical. Theological arguments would have been enough if the danger were purely symbolic. You do not need to tie a child's arm behind their back to prevent them from thinking the wrong thought. But the Church used the body because the threat it was containing was neurological. The left hand's connection to the right hemisphere of the brain, the hemisphere that processes unity, pattern, holistic perception, and direct knowing without language, was exactly the circuitry Jesus had taught his chosen students to activate. They were not suppressing a preference. They were rewiring human brains away from a specific channel of access that the Pistis Sophia calls direct recognition of the monad. And they understood, with uncomfortable clarity, that it was working. The Pistis Sophia is not a fringe text discovered in a basement. It is one of the most extensively documented Gnostic manuscripts in existence, written in Coptic, preserved across multiple codices, and studied by serious scholars of early Christianity for nearly 2 centuries. What makes it dangerous, what made it a priority for suppression, is not that it is strange or fantastical. It is that it is specific. Jesus does not speak in parables in the Pistis Sophia the way he does in the canonical Gospels. He speaks to his inner circle directly, technically, with the precision of someone transmitting functional knowledge rather than moral allegory. Among the transmissions recorded in that text is what later interpreters, those who managed to preserve fragments of the tradition, called the left-hand sequence. It is not described as a ritual of petition. Jesus is not teaching his students how to ask for something from a distant God. He is teaching them how to remember what they already are. The monad, in Gnostic understanding, is not a deity who grants or withholds. It is the singular, undifferentiated source from which all consciousness emerges and to which it remains, at its deepest layer, permanently connected. The sequence Jesus describes is a method of dropping the perceptual layer that makes separation feel real, using the body itself as the instrument of remembrance. The left hand is the physical anchor of that process because of where it sits in the architecture of the nervous system. The early Church Fathers who read these texts were educated men. They understood the relationship between body, brain, and perception well enough to recognize that what Jesus was describing was not metaphorical, and their response, to bury the text, to corrupt the language around the left side of the body, and to physically retrain entire generations away from left-hand dominance tells you more about what the Pistis Sophia actually contains than any scholarly commentary ever could. You do not spend 17 centuries suppressing a symbol. You suppress a technology. After this video was first shared, hundreds asked the same question. Where can they go deeper? We put together a complete guide with everything you need. The link is in the comments. Modern neuroscience has spent decades mapping the functional differences between the brains to hemispheres, and what it has found without intending to is a precise anatomical explanation for why the left-hand sequence works. The left hemisphere, which governs the right side of the body, including the dominant right hand, specializes in sequential processing. It breaks experience into discrete units, labels them, places them in linear order, and produces the internal narrative that most people experience as ordinary consciousness. It is efficient, functional, and deeply useful for navigating a world that requires language and analysis. It is also the primary operating system of what Gnostic tradition calls the archonic frequency, the perceptual mode that makes separation, scarcity, and division feel like objective reality rather than constructed experience. The right hemisphere, which governs the left side of the body, including the left hand, operates on entirely different principles. It does not analyze, it perceives, it does not sequence. It integrates, it processes information holistically, simultaneously, without the need to break experience into named categories before understanding it. This is the hemisphere responsible for sudden insight, for the feeling of knowing something without being able to explain how you know it, for moments of genuine stillness in which the boundary between self and environment becomes permeable. It is, neurologically speaking, the hemisphere least vulnerable to manipulation through language, because it operates below and beyond the level at which language functions. When Jesus taught the left-hand sequence to his inner circle, he was providing a somatic shortcut, a way of using the body to activate a specific neural state that thinking alone cannot produce. The physical positioning of the left hand at heart level, palm open and facing inward, sends a distinct pattern of sensory signals directly into the right hemisphere. Those signals do not pass through the analytical filter of the left hemisphere first. They arrive as raw experience, and raw experience, unmediated by the narrating mind, is precisely the channel through which recognition of the monad becomes possible. The body is not a metaphor for this process. The body is the mechanism. If this teaching is opening something in you, there is more where this came from. A complete guide with the most important Aramaic words, their exact pronunciation, and the full activation protocols is available now. The link is waiting for you in the comments. The sequence Jesus transmitted in the Pistis Sophia is built from 3 components that are not meant to be practiced one after another. They are meant to operate simultaneously as a single integrated event. When all 3 are active at the same time, the circuit closes. When even one is absent or incomplete, the portal remains sealed. Understanding why each component exists is as important as executing it correctly. Because the sequence is not a ritual in the superstitious sense, it is a precise psychophysical protocol with a clear functional logic. The first component is physical positioning. You sit with your spine upright, your left hand raised to heart level, palm facing toward you, fingers pointing upward. The right hand rests completely passive in your lap. This arrangement creates what the tradition calls a triangle of activation, a direct line connecting the left hand, the heart center, and the eyes. All 3 are engaged simultaneously. The positioning is not symbolic. It creates a specific pattern of muscular and sensory engagement that keeps the right hemisphere in an active receptive state for the duration of the practice. The second component is the breath pattern. On the inhale, through the nose, you direct attention to a sensation of energy descending from above, entering through the crown of the head, moving through the spine, expanding at the chest, and channeling out into the left palm. On the exhale through the mouth, you visualize that energy radiating outward from the palm in expanding concentric rings. The breath is not decoration. It is the pump that moves frequency through the circuit. Without it, the physical positioning becomes static. With it, the system begins to flow. The third component is the internal declaration, 7 words spoken silently at the precise moment of exhalation, while the sense of radiation from the palm is most vivid. The phrase is not a petition. It is not a request. It is a statement of ontological fact. I am monad eternal. Not I hope to be connected. Not I am reaching for God. Recognition, not supplication. This distinction is everything. The complete guide is pinned in the first comment, the most important Aramaic words, their exact pronunciation, and the full activation protocols. For those ready to go deeper, the link is there waiting. Jesus was explicit in the Pistis Sophia about the duration required to establish a permanent shift rather than a temporary experience. 7 consecutive nights, not 7 sessions spread across a month, 7 uninterrupted evenings in which the circuit is reopened, widened, and finally stabilized into what the tradition describes as a new default operating frequency. The number 7 is not numerological mysticism here. It reflects something neuroscience independently confirms. Meaningful neuroplastic change requires consistent repetition within a specific temporal window to produce stable new pathways rather than fleeting activation. The first night opens a channel that has likely been closed for a very long time. The second night begins to widen it. By the third night, the ego's resistance becomes noticeable, doubt, distraction, a strong impulse to skip the practice or rationalize that it is not working. This is precisely when continuing matters most. The fourth night brings the first experience of something settling into the body rather than requiring effort to maintain. The fifth night marks a qualitative shift that is difficult to describe but unmistakable when it happens. The frequency begins to persist between sessions, carried forward into ordinary consciousness during the day. The signs of genuine activation are not subjective impressions that require interpretation. They are consistent, specific, and reported by practitioners across traditions that preserved fragments of this sequence without knowing each other. During the practice itself, tingling in the left palm, sometimes accompanied by heat or a sense of rhythmic pulsation, indicates that the meridian channels, long dormant in that hand, are reactivating. Why, every passing current. Within 2 to 4 hours after the first session, a quality of mental clarity appears, not forced focus but spontaneous transparency, in which decisions and directions that had seemed complex reveal themselves as obvious. The first night of sleep following activation typically brings vivid, luminous dreaming, often involving circles, spirals, or landscapes of extraordinary elevation. After 3 to 5 days of consistent practice, emotional reactivity to external circumstances measurably decreases, not because feeling is suppressed, but because the observer has stabilized at a level where it is no longer swept away by every passing current. For 17 centuries, one of the most precise and functional spiritual technologies ever transmitted was systematically dismantled through language, through law, through physical force applied to the bodies of children. The suppression of the left hand was not culture. It was strategy. And the strategy worked until now. What you have received in this video is the foundation of what the Pistis Sophia preserved. The understanding that the left hand is neurologically connected to the hemisphere of the brain most capable of experiencing unity directly, that Jesus taught a specific 3-part sequence using physical positioning, breath, and internal declaration to activate that connection, and that 7 consecutive nights of practice is the precise threshold required to make that activation permanent rather than passing. The declaration at the center of the sequence, I am monad eternal, is not a mantra you repeat in hopes that something outside you will respond. It is a recognition directed inward, toward the layer of your own consciousness that was never separate from the source to begin with. You are not building a connection. You are dissolving the belief that it was ever broken. Everything in this video is the foundation. The complete guide is pinned in the first comment, the most important Aramaic words, their exact pronunciation, and the full activation protocols. For those ready to go deeper, the link is there, waiting for you. And if this activated something in you, if you felt a shift while watching, you are ready for what comes next. In the next video, we enter the Aramaic activation codes for healing the precise frequency sequence Jesus used to restore the body at the cellular level. The same technology, a deeper transmission. Do not miss Italiano. Right now, before you close this video, speak the 4 words, Cariest, then come to the comments, and tell us, what did you feel? What shifted? We read every single response. And if this teaching found you today, subscribe to this channel. Every week, we go deeper into the ancient frequency codes that were always meant to be yours.